Okay, continuing our discussion of the organelles of a cell. We already talked about the nucleus. It controls the cell, basically. The ribosomes make proteins, the cell membrane selectively permeable, the cell wall for structural support, and basically protection from being crushed by other cells. So let's continue down our list. The next organelle that we're going to talk about is referred to as the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum is the long way of saying it, but the short way of saying it is ER. And it's basically a bunch of membranes that are most abundant right around the nucleus, some of which have numerous ribosomes, as you can see, embedded in the membranes themselves. Again, we call it the ER for short for endoplasmic reticulum. That's spelled out in the handout. No need to write it all out here. But basically, again, it is just a series or a system of membranes. And these membranes basically channel materials around the cell. Particularly, they are involved in channeling the products of the ribosomes. Remember, if we look back at our diagram here, the ER is covered with ribosomes, and ribosomes, as we said last time, make proteins, and so the ER membranes channel proteins around the cell. The next organelle is a spherical bunch of membranes, and they are referred to as Golgi bodies, Golgi apparatus, or some people even refer to them as dictyosomes, but just Golgi bodies or Golgi is good enough for our purposes. And like the ER, it is a bunch of membranes, and these membranes in the Golgi are involved in packaging up materials. And you can see on the right side here, I'll go ahead and label it. This Golgi is forming a little membrane envelope or membrane bubble, and this is called a vesicle. And basically these Golgi bodies, switch colors. The Golgi bodies, again, package up complex molecules. So we'll say they package, let's say, just cell products in little membrane envelopes called vesicles. Okay, and that vesicles is a term that you should now become familiar with. So what's so special about them? Well, the vesicle is made of membrane, and in fact it's made up of the same membrane as the cell membrane. They are not connected at this point, but the way a vesicle works is that if we have, let's say, this is our vesicle and here is the cell membrane, and inside of this vesicle maybe we've got some aromatic oil in a flower that the cells need to get to the outer portions of the flower, in other words, outside of the cell itself. Cells have to avoid disrupting the integrity of their cell membrane, and so what the vesicle accomplishes for them is that the vesicle molds with or melts basically into the oil in there again, melts into the cell membrane, and then it dissolves on the outer parts, which thereby releases the oil or whatever it is we're talking about, and still maintains the integrity of the cell membrane. So vesicles are pretty important for cells, particularly cells that are producing products that need to go somewhere outside of the cells. All right, our next organelle here is a chloroplast, and chloroplasts are what give a plant cell its color, because this is where you find the pigments. The chloroplasts are green, and as you've probably already guessed, chloroplasts are where photosynthesis happens. So that's their job, is to carry out photosynthesis. And as we discussed before, photosynthesis involves the absorbing of light. We'll go ahead and put a little summary here. Light plus carbon dioxide is used to make sugar, and fortunately for us, the chloroplasts also make oxygen, which we breathe. So they produce sugar and oxygen. They consume light and carbon dioxide and a little bit of water as well. And we'll get into more details about what goes on in photosynthesis in the coming modules. So chloroplasts are unique to plant cells, and you won't find them in animal cells, unlike the rest of these organelles. You'll also see all these in animal cells, with the exception of chloroplasts and the cell wall. Our next organelle is the mitochondria. We say mitochondrion as a singular mitochondria, and it is a double membraned organelle, and this is where respiration takes place. So there's our key factors for mitochondria. This is where respiration occurs. And as we talked about before, respiration is when you take sugar and oxygen and you use it to do work or produce a usable form of energy, which we'll use ATP with our little comic book around it, explosion around it, to represent the energy that is released. It also releases carbon dioxide as a waste product, and we'll get into the details of respiration in the coming days as well. So our next organelle on the list here is the largest of the organelle, and I'm just going to label right on top of the drawing here, and it is called the vacuole. The vacuole is basically a big membrane envelope, and it's been cut in half in this figure here, and its job is for storage. And it, depending on the cell and what the cell is doing at any one particular time, it might be storing things like sugars, it might be storing various types of salts, or even just water. But as you can see, it's the largest of the organelles, and in many cells it's much larger than it's even depicted here. So the vacuole is basically a membrane envelope. Unlike a vesicle, though, it is quite large, and it's basically used for storage in the cell, sort of like the warehouse of the cell. Throughout the cell, we also have a number of small organelles that we refer to as microbodies. And this just refers to numerous different types of enzyme complexes, and these enzymes' jobs are usually to clean up the cell. In other words, with all these processes like photosynthesis going on in chloroplasts and respiration going on in mitochondria, you've got ultraviolet light coming in during the daylight hours from the sun. You can have the buildup of some molecules that are potentially harmful to the cell, and they call those kind of molecules radicals. And these microbodies' job are to scavenge around the cell and basically find these harmful molecules and get rid of them. And so we'll just put for microbodies, we'll say they are the scavengers of the cell. Also, you can say they're the cleanup crew for the cell. They get rid of the garbage or the potentially harmful molecules that develop as a result of various types of processes going on in the cell. The next organelle is not drawn in on this figure. I'm going to go ahead and draw some in now. I'm just going to put some lines inside of the cell going in all different directions. And this is what we will refer to as the cytoskeleton. All right, and the cytoskeleton is basically a series of microscopic tubules and fibers throughout the interior of the cell, and its function is to support and arrange all the various organelles in the 3 dimensions of the cell. Even as small of a scale as we're talking about here, remember this is microscopic scale, these organelles all have mass, and so they're subject to gravity, and if there was nothing to arrange them, they would all be in a blob down at the bottom of the cell, which isn't a very good arrangement for a plant cell to be able to photosynthesize and do what it needs to do. And so the cytoskeleton is important to prop up the rest of the organelles. And so we'll just put exactly that. Cytoskeleton we'll say holds the organelles in place so that they're arranged in a logical way. The rest of the volume of this cell is pretty much made up of a gel-like substance, and it's mostly water, but it has various things dissolved in it, and it is referred to as the cytoplasm. And it's not an actual organelle, it's just sort of the stuff that the organelles are floating around in or being suspended in by the cytoskeleton. And it's mostly water, and various solutes, which means things dissolved in the water. Cytoplasm is often referred to as the cell sap. If you were to pierce this cell, it would come oozing out of the cell. All right, and finally, something else we need to talk about here in our cell diagram are these guys, and they are little extensions of the cell membrane through the cell walls. And next to this cell, you have to picture there's an additional cell here. Likewise, there's an additional cell in this area, and all sides of this cell, if it were 3-dimensional, which it is in the plant. These are referred to as plasmodesmata. And what they are is basically little connections between the cells that allow for the flow of cytoplasm from one cell to another. And this can be handy for cells that are maybe sharing resources like sugars or water even, although water is going to pass right through the membrane and the cell wall. Things that are dissolved in the cytoplasm do not pass freely through the membrane. And so if you are a cell and you need to get some of these salts or something else that's dissolved in your cytoplasm to the cell next door for whatever reason, you've got 2 options. You can either pump it across your membrane, which costs energy, and then the cell next door would have to in turn pump it across its membrane to get it inside of itself, or you simply create these little plasmodesmata, which means stream of cytoplasm, and you basically allow things to flow between it. Things that ordinarily could not go through the cell membrane. Because of the plasmodesmata, it's a stream. It does not have to go through the membrane per se at all. And so we'll just go ahead and put plasmodesmata. And once again, we'll just say they are streams of cytoplasm between, 2 cells. Okay? And so that pretty much wraps up all the various parts of the cell. And remember, this is one unit within a plant. All of these organelles and various parts here have to work together to allow this cell to accomplish its goals. If it's a leaf cell, its main goal is to use these chloroplasts to make sugars, but it also needs to burn some sugars to keep the rest of it going, like to copy its DNA if it's going to divide, or to make proteins to run these various processes in the ribosomes. However, it all works together to allow a cell to carry out its day-to-day functions.